quality, and yeah, how we can support developers, first of all, in dealing with ESG risks. So that's what the topic is focusing on. The session is converging around an important initiative that will be launched by IFDB and IFC, which will look at how to support developers and project implementers in assessing and addressing ESG compliance in their projects. This theme for us as CAMCO, so I work for CAMCO, which is a climate and impact fund manager. We have made multiple investments in the DRE space. A couple of those investments were in SHS, but many more in mini-grids. And we are continuing to finance particularly mini-grid projects, but also other types of off-grid and integrated projects. So it's a topic that's been dear to our hearts. We like to think that as a fund manager, we are nimble and fast and able to move very quickly on our investments, but it doesn't always depend on us. You know, it depends on requirements that are being passed on to us by our funders and those that define the standards that we work with, and those are the standards that we pass on to our investees. And so making sure that we are aligned and that we help them be aligned and we're all on the same page is quite important for us. So we started this conversation with ARE probably about 2 years ago in terms of how we could support our investees and developers in this area. And it's really exciting, therefore, to see that this project is actually materializing. So without further ado, the session will include a couple of welcome remarks and presentations before we kick off for a discussion with a group of very experienced investors and developers on the panel. So first of all, let me invite Jan ten Wes for some opening remarks about this new project.
Thank you, Eva. Thank you everyone for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So Jan ten Wes from the International Finance Corporation. So as you know, under M300, which is a major push for us, we're scaling up our activities. And a colleague of mine told that in the plenary, in the opening plenary, but just to recap, we're doing more in debt financing. So we're partnering with, for example, Signum Capital and the Facility for Energy Inclusion to make debt more available. We're putting debt on the ground, for example, in Nigeria as part of our DRE program, where we have a 200 million envelope revolving debt facility for construction. We're making a major push on equity through ZAFIRI, and we're doing this partnership with AfDB and the World Bank and others. And that is great. I mean, this push has been needed, and we're finally getting through it under M300, and that's a good news. One of the concerns we have as a World Bank group with such a push, which is mostly focused on investment, it's really deployment at the end of the day. In fact, making announcement is the easy part. We're announcing billions of dollars here and there, and it's great, and we're signing and we're making press releases, but the hard part is going to start. It's about deploying the capital and deploying it well. And so in addition to that financing aspect, which is the core and bread and butter of the World Bank Group, we're also trying to focus on some softer aspects that are going to support that deployment later on. And of course, we're having advisory activities also as IFC. For example, we're helping governments in designing larger programs. We have a scaling mini-grid program, for example, active in 3 countries at the moment. We have some advisory programs for early stage companies as well. And we're trying to scale that up as well with the team that's here. And the last part is on public goods. We have ambition to also make a push on public goods. One of them is, for example, something that will be announced in a couple of months is we're working with the World Bank and AfDB, not AfDB on this one, sorry, with the World Bank and SMAP on open sourcing VIDA, for example. Just so that VIDA is open access to everyone, and we provide market intelligence. And that, in our view, it's soft touch, is enabling environment, but overall the name of the game, or the spirit for us, the end game, is to accelerate pipeline development and improving the quality of that pipeline. Because at the end, will be the one looking at financing it in the second stage through those announcements. And one of those public goods is ENS. And ENS falls straight into our court because the key reference for ENS is the IFC Performance Standards. No, I'm not an ENS specialist, but speaking to companies, thanks also to the colleagues at CAMCO, the IRE and so on, what I found out, I didn't know, is that the IFC Performance Standards are very generic, in fact, because they apply to a hydro dam, a massive project, they apply to a chicken farm in Africa, they apply to an industrial park in Asia. And so they're drafted in a very generic format. And what we realized, what came to us, is that what we found is that two issues with that is that because they're very generic, they're subject to interpretation. And that creates two problems. One is that financiers of all kinds, whether it's grant or even more, private financing, have their own interpretation of the standards. And that means that one day you're getting money here and you're having to comply with one set of requirements, and then you want money from there and you have other requirements. And that's a huge burden on small companies that frankly don't have better things to do, frankly, than complying with all those different requirements. The second issue, interestingly, that we found is that often those ENS due diligence and studies are made by consultants. And the consultants, what they do, they take a conservative approach to those standards. And we can't blame them. They want to make sure that what they deliver is up to standards, so they're very stringent in that interpretation. But when we look, then, as IFC or ENS specialists in-house are more flexible because they know those standards need to be interpreted for the sectors they apply in. And so what we are trying to do together with AfDB and the Alliance for Rural Electrification is something that we've done in other sectors, but have not done it yet in the DRE space, is to provide guidance on how to interpret those high-level standards for a given sector. And what we hope is that hopefully it will simplify the life of developers at the end of the day, and also bring some level of harmonization and understanding, which is what everyone asks, like, stop having different requirements. Can you guys agree on one set of requirements? And hopefully, because we are the owners of the IFC Performance Standard, by providing a guidance with our logo on it, we can create this level playing field that will be, less stringent and more prone to coordination on ENS standards. So that's what we're trying to do, and we're very pleased to partner with the AfDB and IRE on this. But at the core of it, frankly, for me, is making sure that we as IFC can sign off on this, because without our sign-off, it'll have less value. But the equally important part for me is to ensure that really this guidance is informed by, developers that are facing real challenge on the ground and have experience of building projects, because we don't. And so providing guidance without those inputs, could backfire essentially. So we hope that through our engagement with the Alliance for Rural Electrification, we can get a voice from the private sector and from some of you in the room, and we count on your participation going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next up, Robert Aitken of AfDB SEFA for some welcome remarks, as well as an introduction to all of us to learn more about this project.
Thank you, Eva. Thank you, Jan, as well. So, Robert Aitken, I work for SEFA, the Sustainable Energy Fund for Africa, within AfDB. And I too would like to welcome you here on behalf of AfDB to the session on facilitating ESG compliance in the mini-grid and more distributed renewable energy sector. We've been looking forward to presenting this piece of work for some time now. It's an important piece of work that's been a long time in the making. As Jan mentioned, the idea of assisting many grid developers and other operators in the distributed renewable energy sector around ESG compliance has been a long time simmering in the sector, both within AfDB, IFC, ARE, and indeed CAMCO. So it's a great opportunity that we've finally gotten to do something about it. I think our job, certainly at SEFA, as well as IFC, is to provide technical assistance to many grid developers. It's a hard ask. We know ESG compliance is important, and we need to provide the kind of assistance, whether it's interpretation of the standards or indeed, a guidance around conforming or complying with these standards. This is a role that technical assistance needs to play, and I think there's many reasons for this. I'd just like to highlight three. So, in all our work, whatever we do, we need to embrace sustainability in the broadest sense, and ESG compliance is part of that assurance. And also the overarching narrative both here and last week's ALE event in Lusaka was access to finance, whether it's equity, debt, etc. And I think enhanced capacity to comply with ESG frameworks moves us in the right direction in terms of capital raising. And also the last point, which I've mentioned, is if we want mini grids and other DRE exponents to succeed, which is part of every sort of least cost electrification assessment, then they need our assistance. They really do. It's a tough job in a difficult market. And I guess the work we're doing here, along with IFC and ARE, is an acknowledgement of this commitment in terms of technical assistance. So we sincerely hope you enjoy the session and get to engage with the panel of experts. It is an interesting debate. It's a lively debate. And before I move on to sort of just contextualizing some of the background of it, I'd like to thank our partners, IFC and ARE. I think the partnership adds a huge amount of credibility, to the process and confidence in the outcomes. So if I could just move to the... Okay. So I'm the program officer for AMAP, the African Mini Grid Market Acceleration Program, and we operate under SEFA, Sustainable Energy Fund for Africa. SEFA is a multi-donor special trust fund within AfDB, providing catalytic finance, concessional investment in that space. There are three themes. The work that we do falls under the mini grid theme, and under AMAP there's three pillars, and we really value the third pillar, developer support, which this initiative falls under. If you could move to the next slide. So some time back we commissioned a gap analysis, and the consulting firm engaged extensively with developers, and amongst a range of priorities, ESG compliance was particularly high on the list. So it is market-led, it's market-driven. These are not detached conversations. Following these sorts of observations, we engaged extensively with the sector, IFC, ARE, amongst others. We're all discussing the same sorts of challenges. ESG compliance. The outcome was a partnership between AfDB and IFC with ARE as the industry engagement partner. And the next slide. Some of the challenges we noted in the assessment and through the engagement with the capacity constraints. Well, we'll hear from the panel of experts where the true challenges lie, but in our preliminary observations, it was around capacity constraints, particularly in sort of tier 2 mini grid developers is what we focus on, but other sort of small scale infrastructure initiatives as well. Lacking the specific knowledge of ESG standards as well as the resources to comply. Having an ESG officer as a mid-stage mini grid development company is an overhead that's necessary but hard to sustain. So we need to sort of assist where we can and make sure they are in compliance without adding additional burdens on these companies. It's a nascent, immature market. Familiarity with these sorts of requirements is fairly low, particularly amongst the sort of level 2 or tier 2 developers. Also, there's a little bit of a lack of consistency between expectations from financiers. Different institutions have slightly varying ESG risk management and reporting requirements. different indicators, methodologies, and templates. It's challenging particularly for those less familiar with the ESG landscape. There's also an issue of limited access to finance. Without meeting investors' ESG requirements, we make it even harder for developing companies in that space to access finance. So let me leave it there, and looking forward to a lively debate, and hand it back to Eva. Thank you.
So thank you very much. And again, I'm super excited to see this initiative being launched. We'll delve into the discussion shortly, but last but not least, I'd like to invite Jens Jäger from ARE to talk about the role of ARE and really the importance of the stakeholder engagement, which Jan already alluded to.
Thank you, Eva. Thank you, Jan and Robert, for the introductory remarks. So a lot of what I had on my first slide has already been said, but I can perhaps add on the what or the why of we're doing this initiative is also we started an engagement process through our financier circle about a year ago, where ESG harmonization and guidance was brought up as a challenge for industry, both from the finance side, from the investor side, as well as the developer side. So this comes, let's say, as an industry, it's an industry initiative, driven initiative from the start that has been requested by the members, and then we engaged with IFC and AfDB to see how we could make that happen. So thanks a lot for the support. So that's on the why. Maybe if we turn to the next slide, I think Robert already outlined the challenges we're addressing. Just to reiterate, it's really about strengthening capacity and improving, or let's say, increasing simplification for companies. So with additional guidance, we hope to be able to have faster processes, more simple processes, and that's really a key factor for private sector. The second thing is, yes, also on the investor side, there's been discussion obviously about harmonization. Now the details can be difficult on that, so we'll see how far we can get, but obviously we will do the best we can to harmonize and streamline processes. So what are we going to do to engage industry? How will we do it specifically? We're going to organize regular exchanges through what we call the technical engagement group. It's open for all stakeholders interested, so not exclusively ARE members per se. It is any mini-grid stakeholder. I'll come to the key target audiences in a moment, but anyone is welcome. We'll organize a series of virtual consultations. We'll also share documents for written feedback. And then obviously as ARE, we can be a channel to facilitate the free flowing of information to the sector, to anyone that is interested. And lastly, we are also looking, of course, towards the long-term uptake of the project. So it shouldn't just be we have a one-year project and then nothing happens after that. We're going to own the project and continue to apply this guidance post the initial one-year period. So I mentioned a lot of what's been planned already. Additionally, there's also going to be some pilot testing that I didn't mention before. And essentially, what is also critical is ESG training activities per company. So direct capacity building can be offered through the project. We are looking at an initial period of 1 year for the, let's say, the project per se, and then obviously it's going to be a long-term project that will also continue after that. I think we can go to the next slide where we see who can be part of it. So as said, anyone is welcome, but I guess there are 3 main target audiences. So it's investors, for obvious reasons, to coordinate and harmonize and simplify. It's mini-grid EPCs, developers, and other companies engaged in this space that need the capacity building and guidance. And then obviously we are also going to engage with other association partners that can multiply the effect of the project. So that can be national renewable energy associations, other sector associations on mini-grids, etc. Last but not least, how do you become part of the group? Well, it's quite simple. You just contact me or a member of the team, and then we can discuss, and we'll sign you up for all the engagement sessions and share information with you. Thank you, everyone. Back to you, Jeve, for the concrete discussions.
Yeah, if it's possible to fix the roving mic, that would be very helpful. So thank you very much for the introductory remarks. We have some good time, I believe, for the discussion. Maybe we can go to the next slide as well so we can see our panel. So I'd like to invite the panelists to the stage. We have a group of 4 brilliant experts in their fields, 2 developers, 2 representing the developer side and 2 representing the investor side. So we hope that there'll be some good discussion between the 2 groups. So Maud Watelet from Electrify EDFI, Guillaume Dupuis from Gaia, as well as Arnaud Henin from Gomir, and Sharmark Abdul Kadir from Tamar. So you can tell me if I've butchered your name very badly or just badly. Okay. I guess we will not have this microphone. Okay. Anyway, we're here. So the purpose of this discussion, I think what we'd like to achieve is to give a little bit of a flavor to everyone in the room of what are the key risks, ESG risks that you are encountering, whether on the investment side or in the day-to-day project development and implementation in your local contexts. And then to really drill into the ESG requirements and the processes that as developers you have to go through, as an investors you have to take developers through, and how we can find convergence there. And finally, I think we also really want to get some takeaways of how to make sure that this initiative, this program that's being launched today, that it will be a success. So, what would be really transformational to make sure that it is part of the program and it's implemented the way that will really, hopefully, maybe transform is too big of a word, but really help the sector move forward. So I'd like to start with the developers, if that's okay. And the question is really quite broad, but please take some time to introduce yourselves and your work and the context of the markets as well in which you're working, the technologies and the markets as well. And tell us a little bit more about what ESG risks do you mostly face in your day-to-day work. Let us get a sense of what is it like on the ground.
Great, thanks. So I'm Arnaud Henin of Gomir Power Networks. We are a mini-grid and microgrid project developer, project contractor, builder, and asset owner-operator. Active right now in Nigeria, DR Congo, and Mozambique. And so we follow projects kind of through the whole life cycle of a project. And I guess I'll start with just saying that every section of a project life is complicated. Development is complicated, it takes a long time. Getting everything from the licensing, the sites, engagement with the communities, also the financing, all of this takes usually much longer than expected. And that continues through construction where there is typically a lot of challenges from a technical perspective, finding ways to bring equipment into country, finding ways to bring equipment to a site, finding the right contractors that can get to site and do it at cost points that make sense. And then the operations also continue. There's always issues. We've had everything from flooding of sites, Ebola outbreaks, shutdowns with COVID. So there's a lot of challenges, and I think even more so because a lot of projects are in rural areas and more remote areas, and so all these issues compound. All that I think comes together to say that projects are extremely difficult. We're in fairly frontier markets. Nigeria has a good framework and a lot of support in a fairly well structured and second phase of a mini grid supporting program. The other markets, in terms of regulation and everything, are less advanced, so there's even more challenges in certain aspects there. But it is a very, very difficult process and sector for everyone, and that means that accessing finance is a challenge. The economics of projects are super challenging, and operating as a company and trying to manage your viability, economic viability, is a challenge. I guess one interesting aspect is that when we're talking about ESG, we're doing mostly solar battery technologies, which I think is probably the lion's share of projects in the mini grid space right now, just because the cost points, like the economics, are driving that. So solar is hard to beat, and from an economic perspective, also from a simplicity perspective, there's less work required for assessing renewable resource or whatever. But we are renewable based. Our projects are typically high renewable percentage. We're working in and underserved areas for the most part, so bringing electricity for the first time, so highly disadvantaged people, and so we should be, meeting all the ESG objectives easily. Like this should be the sector that, from an ESG, from an impact perspective, should be top of any impact investor's mind. The reason we're there is that we kind of have a philosophy that if you're going to put $5 million into projects and you want to have a climate and an impact and development, I don't think that you can have bigger impact than in these microgrid, mini-grid projects in frontier markets. So that's why we think the challenges and all these issues and the economics are worth to beat. So I think we should actually be flipping the discussion and saying, why are the impact investors not finding ways to make this work? And I guess just, I think there's lots of ESG benefits as well, and we'll talk about maybe some of that a little bit later, but I think because the projects are also already so difficult, because financing is already so difficult, every incremental kind of burden of reporting, of compliance requirements and all this is challenging for developers, for project owners to kind of bear. And of course, whatever costs we have for compliance and due diligence and all this has to get passed on to our clients and our users, and who are also very cost sensitive and obviously least able to bear some of those costs. So I'll let the others speak as well.
My name is Shumarka, and I'm the CEO of Damarso. It's a renewable energy company based in Somalia. We have been working the last 10 years in mostly off-grid, and in the last 3 years we've been working in the mini-grid sector as well. And it's a very difficult month. I heard you saying difficult market, but to us it's maybe plus because it's a market that is new to the environment of impact investors, and thank God the UN is doing a lot of work there, and World Bank is testing some small projects where they by checking how is it going, and we won a challenge fund 3 years ago with AACF, African Mini Grid Challenge Fund, that was specially meant for, while they knew it's not an easy market, that project was meant to support companies like us in Somalia. I think around 5 companies won, and the meaning of that project was also to have half of the project was TA for the companies like us. So we got a lot of support in terms of designing, and the TA in the TA is a lot of designing of the ESGs. I think ESG in Somalia is like emerging concept, And this concept is new to Somalia, and that's the reason why impact investors are not there. So, and I think we have, let's say, more serious problems, they say, by the government, if we talk about ESG with them, say we have problems with stability, insecurity. So that's more priority for the government, and we try to have both of that in a mixed environment. Yeah.
I will ultimately have problems with this microphone. Thank you very much. Maybe just to follow on first on Sharmark, what you were saying. So you mentioned that you have worked with AECF, and they provided the technical assistance for you to put these processes and systems in place. Perhaps it would be interesting to learn a little bit more about that experience, and then you know, what was helpful for you, or what do you think would have been even more helpful, or what additional follow-on support in that area would be helpful?
Yeah. I think the majority of the ESG points that we worked so hard on it to make sure it came across within our organization, within our policies that we had. We didn't have a lot of policies. I think during the let's say, due diligence, we had to do a lot of trainings within the due diligence. That was the project. And the most important thing in Somalia is the social engagement, and the social part of that ESG is the most important. There is a lot of conflict areas where we work in, and places where most companies cannot go. So one of the very important things is to know the people who are in that village before you do anything. So if you are installing a solar system in that village, you need to be there in the village. You need to send the right people into the village, and you need to assess the village, which tribal groups of people live there. You need to also check where are we. We have external contractors for building, and we source the local material over there. So if you source at one point, at one supplier, it could be that you are actually also making the other group in that village very angry and mad. So you need to check that kind of things and we've had a lot of problems in developing mini grids, especially in a little bit bigger villages, like 100, 200 households, those ones. It's more complicated than the ones that 60 or 100 are less than 100. So it's challenging. I think we learned a lot before AECF also. We had small grant for solar home systems from World Bank directly, also meant to, let's say, to kick up Somali entrepreneurs who are in the electrification sector. And that was also our start to get to know ESG. So also the environmental side is also important. You know, got the trees and the waste management, and all these things are there. And when it comes to the government of Somalia, they have the policies. I think most of the policies are there, but let's say doing something about the policies or enforcing them, that's another story. So it comes from the private sector together with the very few investors or the very few impact investors that are trying, like testing water in Somalia, and we are the pioneer from, hey, we want to test something, let's go to Tomorso.
So now you are actually defining what the good ESG practice should be in the country, in a way.
Again?
I'm saying you are now defining what the good ESG practice should be in your
I'm
markets.
defining, yeah.
Thank you. Maybe back to Arnaud very quickly and bringing it kind of closer to the investors who are sitting next to me and who will be on a hot fire very soon. So you were talking, I think, a little bit about the level of requirements, and I understand that you have worked with in different markets and raising capital probably from different investors. Maybe you could just share a little bit more about that experience of working with investors and their let's say, interpretation of the different requirements. That's something that, Jant and Wes mentioned as a very, I think for me as well and for us, it's a very important aspect of this program. It's the fact that we have the requirements, the AfDB and IFC requirements at a higher level, but we are in the DRE space dealing with a lot of very innovative business models, very diverse business models, and so we have to somehow adapt those requirements and interpretation, basically, align on the interpretation of those requirements. So what's your experience of working with different funders? Have you noticed that there are differences in how they assess these risks or their requirements, and how does that align with your thinking?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting point. And I think there is, so we've typically had to pull together almost a mosaic of financing for every project or group of projects, just because financing is such a challenge, and it is a tough space. So we've done everything from grant to concessional to some local market commercial, and even some selling RECs to private sector. And there's a huge range, I guess, in terms of their own ESG requirements. Most of our ESG reporting does have to link up with whatever the financier requirements are. I think the private sector is often less heavy. I think they don't have to justify, I guess it's not taxpayer money that they have to justify. And in certain cases, it's fairly small amounts, so they're almost willing to take a fairly, let's see how it goes, and hopefully they can manage the risks and track it at a lighter level. Biggest challenge, I guess, is if you have multiple lenders and they have different requirements, if you have to pay for due diligence, again, these fees, sometimes there's technical assistance that can help you cover that or finance parts of that, but oftentimes you still have to cover it in one way. There's also lots of time from a team perspective to do due diligence and make sure compliance and ensure. In the worst case, you're kind of adjusting your policies or drafting policies to tick boxes, which I think is not the most useful use of time for anyone. But I do think there is a lot of value in considering some of, obviously, our risks from a social side, from a community side. So I think that we have had experiences as well where it's helped us kind of identify opportunities or mitigate risks as well. And that's kind of the best case scenario. But yeah, it's everything from very light to more heavy and expensive and time consuming from a team perspective.
Thank you. Let's turn to the two fund managers on the panel. Maybe feel free to comment on what you've heard, but also, of course, based on your experience. Let's start with the question of, at the deal stage, so investment stage, what are currently the key challenges that you're facing on the ESG side that are perhaps slowing the deal flow or making it more cumbersome?
So good afternoon, everyone. Maud Watley. I'm a Senior Investment Officer at EDFI Electrify. We are an investment manager managing funds from the EU in the energy access space. We have today deployed a portfolio of 150 million, of which about 30% is in the mini-grid space. As an investor, the companies that we are dealing with are small companies. They are early stage companies, sometimes only a few years old, sometimes with only maybe 10 people. They usually are very versatile, having developed their skills at other electricity or energy companies, but being founders, creating their company and starting from scratch. And they don't have, obviously, an ENS manager from the start. So the difficulty, the first thing that we face is not having the capacity in-house, and it's necessary for us. These are small companies. We're doing small tickets, so every penny counts also for the company to deploy the assets. So there is a big work to be done in making the company and the founders understand the importance of ENS, but on our side also being understanding and seeing where they start with and being flexible in adapting our requirement, adapting, taking the time to explain, and indeed not having a checkbox approach, really having an educative approach to support and accompany the founders in their ENS journey. So this is one thing that is really key and that we have to face. Indeed, another risk or another challenge that we see sometimes when we are co-investing with other institutions that have a different approach or a much more prescriptive approach, and I will not name names here. It's being able to align, avoiding indeed to have multiple reporting templates or things that are doubling or tripling the work for the developers. In terms also of what has been mentioned earlier, some countries are more advanced in terms of the regulatory context, but some have very early or very young legislations in terms of mini-grids. And we faced markets where there is a law, but there is no application decree for this law. So you end up in a catch-22 where, for compliance reason, you should have this piece of paper or authorization or document from the government or the energy regulator. But this entity or this institution cannot issue this document because there is not an application decree. So what do you do in this situation? We try to find a way. So that's all about it, understanding the context of the entrepreneur, being flexible. Another risk maybe that or things that we have been faced with is innovative business model. And indeed, the IFC, we are working with the IFC PS, very generic. We are trying to, we have been interpreting them for the mini-grid sector, for the solar home system, for the CNI sector for years. But then when you have a new innovative model, mesh grids, what do you do? And so it's also being able to adapt, to understand the business model, the entrepreneurs that we are talking with on a daily basis.
Thanks, Eva. So, hello everyone, I'm Guillaume Dupuis, partner at Gaia. We are an impact venture capital firm specialized in distributed renewable energy investments in Africa. We've been operating since 2017. We've invested in 16 companies, 3 of them being mini-grid companies, or at least having like significant exposure to the mini-grid's operational challenges. And we are also an impact fund, and one of the interesting things that happened to us recently, because we raised our fund 2 in 2023, was that we wanted to file under the Article 9 SFDR regulation in Europe, because we thought this was interesting and important to state our commitment to impact as a fund manager. And we also discovered that this specific framework comes with a lot of strings attached when it comes to new requirements, reporting requirements, compliance with a number of standards. So we've also discovered this world as an impact fund, which was previously not the case with the first fund that was much more flexible and, as you said, Maud, was able to focus on very early stage companies, acknowledging the states they were at in terms of ESG compliance. So we've kind of grown to a stage where we need to really ask to what extent ESG compliance, all of those standards are material in our business model and the way we are looking at companies and helping companies to grow. And there's been a few lessons learned here, especially as, I mean, what strikes me with the mini-grid sector is how ESG intensive the whole sector is. I mean, when you're talking about other distributed renewable energy companies or business models like solar home systems, tech companies, it's way different in terms of potential materiality of those ESG topics. And I agree with what have been said before in terms of we need proportionality, we need to understand what really makes sense at the stage of development of each company, each developer, each types of and sizes of projects. But perhaps to bring a slightly additional perspective on this front, I would say that in our opinion as investors and also portfolio managers of three mini-grid companies, ESG risks have a very important chance to materialize, especially as compared to other sectors in the DRE space. So this is why we are quite cautious about being too light, even in the first stages of our investments, in terms of assessing ESG compliance, ESG readiness of the companies we invested into. I mean, different examples. For instance, when we look at opportunities in the mini-grid space, one of the first things we are going to look at is customer mix and whether there is a good mix between professional firms, SMEs, anchor customers, but also retail customers and the way those retail customers are structured. What's the level of inclusivity? What's the level of affordability for the poor populations that are part of the mini-grid and the customer mix? So we start with ESG considerations at the very low customer mix standpoint. Another thing is obviously environmental risks. When you are looking at larger mini-grids, for instance, most of the sites are going to be brownfield or borderline brownfield. So you're looking at sites that will need to come with a lot of environmental considerations when assessing your ability to acquire them, manage them, interact with the local communities and stakeholders. Also environmental considerations when it comes to the generation side of things. Do you have legacy genset capacities? Do you have the ability to connect to, I don't know, anchor loads from a nearby hydro dam, for instance? So all of those topics are extremely important in terms of generation, LCOE, and affordability for the end users. And one of the very important examples I would mention as well would be the robustness, even for smaller developers, the robustness of governance structures in terms of community involvement, both pre and post commissioning, in terms of health and safety frameworks. We've seen that in smaller, like larger sites, pre-commissioning, managing the security of a site is extremely critical, and there is a very material risk that if you don't do everything by the book in terms of health and safety, you'll need to face challenges when it comes to dealing with the local population, local authorities. There is a risk of accidents that is extremely important in those sites, because in the end you are building things that are substantial, complex to operate and to build. So the risk is here. And also in terms of site management, if you're looking at a brownfield operation where you need to secure ownership of the site, how do you deal with legacy owners or traditional owners of the site that had use of right of use or use of passage? How do you deal with that? I think that even as an early stage developer and an operator of those assets, you need to embrace the complexity of doing so. And I think that ESG frameworks in this space have a very strong materiality that needs to be reflected upon. Obviously, what has been said about lack of compatibility between requirements, reporting frameworks, high-level compliance frameworks like IFC Performance Principles. Ourselves as an SFDR fund, we need also to be compliant with OECD guidelines. Obviously, we are looking at competing frameworks here, and there is an extremely important need for harmonization because cost of treating those requests, both at the due diligence level, both on a regular reporting basis, is extremely important and has at some point to be reflected on the operational cost and tariffs that maybe the operators are serving their customers. So obviously all of those challenges are true, but yeah, I wanted to bring this slightly complementary perspective about how material ESG risks are in the sector, even if you're a small company starting to operate in a country. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to follow up on what you were saying, Guillaume, and back to you and Maud as well, the question about this collaboration between the investors. So, you know, you've alluded to the importance of having a more joint understanding and assessment of risks, but what is the reality currently looking like? So if you are co-investing with someone, and by the way, we should acknowledge that none of us on this panel is actually a fully ESG expert. We're just working with our colleagues who are experts in this. So that should be acknowledged. But yeah, have you faced sort of situations where you know, there was a different level of understanding? Have you managed to collaborate? Is DD sharing possible? That's one quite specific question. And then also follow on after the investment is made on the reporting side, to what extent can we maybe talk about becoming, you know, more collaborative as funders in our reporting processes and requirements and systems?
No, so working with co-investors is always making an investment process much more complex. And as you said at the beginning, we want to believe that we are lean and can deploy money in a few months. But there are a lot of complexities, and co-investing is one of them. Obviously, there are different types of investors, and it depends also what is the philosophy and I would say the type of investors. There are people with whom we work much more easily than others. In all cases, we always try to indeed reach economies of scale or efficiency. So indeed, sharing DD. Sometimes you have one investor being earlier, and so having already worked on the terms of reference, but making sure that we can step in. Rely on the DD that has been already kicked off, or if we are at the same stage doing the RFP and selecting the consultant together. It's clearly important because it's a complete nonsense to duplicate this lengthy, expensive, and intensive process. At a later stage, it's also a question of trying to share, and it's not always possible because everybody has their own requirements coming from their funders, and the EU is not the most simple one, but we're trying as much as possible to standardize or to share templates, or to accommodate, for instance, taking the template of one of the two investors and adding a few additional KPIs that are needed, and that makes it then easier for the mini-grid developer to just report on one single template. It's true that also the fact that when you see the unit cost of a mini-grid, it's pretty low compared to the average ticket size that we have, and this is adding a lot of complexity. So also trying to, in this case, trying to address the complexity of having multiple sites, sometimes with very different situations from a geographic or demographic point of view, or the type of clients. So it's also taking this complexity into account when we are setting the ENS action plan. And maybe, so aligning as much as possible. Sometimes the most difficult alignment is maybe on the timelines, because you have different risks. You have the development risk, the construction risk, and then the operations, but making sure that we prefer maybe delaying by 1 or 2 months a compliance requirement, but making sure that this one is completely mastered and that the company is able to deliver properly on it. And as Guillaume mentioned, we are dealing here with some important risk in the construction phase, but also in the operation phase. And so making sure that it's properly the ownership of the compliance of the requirements is properly addressed by the developer.
I mean, all of that is extremely true and significant. Perhaps just, I mean, concurring with Maud here, but in the end, I think it boils down when it comes to deal documentation on the reporting side of things and ESMS side of things, it boils down to project management. Because when you're looking at all of the ESMS, the ESG policies of different investors participating in a deal in the space, when you are taking the time to read through them, there is a lot of overlap. There is a lot of overlap on many topics. So taking the time to understand what should be kind of pulled out because it's being covered by another principle or another framework. Taking the time also to look at the list of indicators, the reporting schedule, the ENS action plan, post-investment, and working towards a convergence of this framework as a single component of the deal documentation in the SHA, in the reps and warranties, or at the level of side letters. Taking this time ideally would be extremely fruitful to help the developers and operators to really work on the materiality of those ESMS practices. Unfortunately, I mean, we've all been in deal documentation. We know how hairy it is. We know how sometimes time is of essence, and you get you get bogged down in more operational or strategic or commercial issues, and you forget to really focus on the ENS side of things when it comes to harmonizing the documentation on this front. But frankly, wouldn't be too difficult, a bit time consuming, but wouldn't be too difficult to come up with a harmonized framework that makes sense for all of the funders. How do we do that? Can we leverage a new set of harmonized principles? Can we work together as it was suggested by AfDB, SEFA area as well? Yes, I think there is a way forward for that. It also boils down to capacity, time, resources to do that in time-critical situations like deal closing. So technical assistance for that, specialized ENS officers for that, working for investors. I don't know. It's quite open.
Okay, thank you. Before we open the floor, I just want to see if either Arnaud or Jean-Marc wanted to comment on anything that's been said.
Maybe just one quick comment from my side on the fact that some of these kind of requirements that were touched upon, I think there's also lots of risks that we've touched upon in terms of ESG, and I think a lot of that actually is, as mentioned, good project management. So as a small company, sometimes I think you hope that the investor they're taking a chance on you no matter what. And if you're going to have to spend 50,000, 60,000 on due diligence or whatever it is for smaller, then you're creating a different level of burden and risk. At the end of the day, you're investing in the team and the competencies. You can obviously help build and reinforce some of that. But yeah, I do believe at the end of the day, you are having to put your trust into the project developers, that they are going to be doing a professionalized version in terms of the site selection, in terms of even the community engagement. That is part of our job. So definitely we're making mistakes. Everyone's learning, and there are the challenges. But hopefully, I think there are sets of good project developers that are doing good projects. And again, I think it should be facilitating these types of companies and supporting them. Again, I think everyone will have improvements to be made, but that yes, we have to understand the challenges of these markets and the sector, and hopefully all work together to make it more smooth.
I think from the perspective of the investors, I would say it's important to have an ESG in any project, because otherwise, if you don't have a certain ESG certain points for a certain country or a certain developer stage. I mean, a developer stage means a small company who's doing off-grids or SHS could be different than a mini grid operator who is going to be in a lot of bigger area. So there should be not uniform, but country-wise, size of the companies-wise. But what can be uniform is more the globally known ESG, like the emissions, human rights, and these kind of things should be for everybody. But country-wise and locally-wise, then you have to have a different ways to see to the problems that can come. I just told you a conflict area is also different than a non-conflict area. So, yeah.
Thank you. We have a bit of time for questions or comments. If anyone would like to come in from the floor, whether it's a question for one of the panelists or you would like to share your thoughts on either the program or your experience. Don't be shy. Yeah. Do we have a microphone? Yeah. Please remember to introduce yourself. Thank you. I don't know about the level of technology that's envisaged for this program, but in terms of tools, so this is exactly what the program will be focusing on. There are a couple of tools already available. I mean, at CAMCO, we have also developed an ESMS guide and tool, which guides you through this process. Cross-Boundary has also done that and outsourced some of their materials, even templates for ESMS. But I think where this program can really be transformational, as has been already said, is in actually helping us all align on how to interpret those requirements, providing additional guidance. And I think that's quite important, not just for developers, but for investors and all of those advisors that are supporting us as well, to converge on how to assess a specific technology or a specific type of a project according to its size and really level of risk. Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who, or unless anyone from the panel would like to comment, but anyone else would like to jump in? Including AfDB or IFC colleagues, based on what you've heard? No? Okay, if there are no questions from the field, then I think the final question to the whole of the panel will be, back to the program that is being launched today. I mean, maybe everything has been said, but if not, then what do you think would really, make it transformational? How to make it, work for the sector?
And so maybe the slides that you presented, Jens, were mainly focused on the first year. So I think that's very important that this first year process of harmonizing and getting to an interpretation that is much more granular for the mini-grid developer is important. Maybe an idea for phase 2, so for year 2 and following is TA. There is a huge need of TA for developing the skills, making it possible for the developers to hire skilled ENS officer and to be able to retain them, to train them. It's also, I'm going to make the comparison in the financial sector. Some years ago in the country where I live, was the new obligation for each financial institution, small or big, to have a compliance officer. And there were maybe 2 or 3 compliance officers on the labor market. So there was really the need to create a new job, a new profession. And it's in fact the regulator itself who started a certification process, training people and having dozens of new compliance officers being certified each year and being able to join those companies, at the same time giving some leeway to the institutions for having this compliance officer hired. So I think that there is really, in terms of TA training, creating the skills at a more, we are always talking about scaling up, but it's not only scaling up from a financial point of view, it's also scaling up the sector from a skill and a number of skilled people point of view.
It's a very good point. I think also TA mostly flows towards third-party call centers. I think on the training side, it's quite important to, as you mentioned, Maud, have skilled individuals that will take further the idea of managing the ESG performance of a company. But it's also true that I've seen in a lot of companies, CEOs having to hire ENS officers just to meet requirements and compliance requirements from investors. So that's in the end, that's an extra cost that could also be covered perhaps by those new generations of TA lines, at least for a couple of first years of the life of a company or during the first stages of the development. So I think this should be most welcome, because in the end, I think there is no way around about having an in-house team of ENS officers, especially in the mini-grid space. And also another suggestion when it comes to the size of the projects. Mini-grids are not an homogeneous asset class. You have the metro grids evolving in brownfield environments with a lot of different configurations with regards to links and relationships with local authorities and stakeholders. And you have the rural mini-grids, smaller size, scattered assets that come with their own lot in terms of ESG challenges. And it's quite clear that those 2 separate assets, the larger version and the smaller rural side of things, should be treated as slightly different asset classes from an ESG standpoint. But they both are extremely stringent ESG risk that needs to be faced and managed. So perhaps this kind of dual approach, dual track, to making it more realistic and less costly, especially for the rural mini-grid developers to face those requirements, would be quite important.
Maybe just final comment from my side is that I fundamentally believe that kind of ESG considerations can and should have a positive impact on projects, that they can be beneficial from a commercial perspective, because it is a lot about thinking about longer term potential issues, risks like the climate risk, the social risks, all these things. And so there is a big potential for making projects more commercially viable, fundamentally better for the long term, which is critical for us, especially as a fairly early sector. And these projects are quickly going to have 5 years, 10 years when we are thinking about battery replacements and other things. So it is good that we're doing this. And yeah, I guess it's a consideration of how we make sure that best practice, from as simple as incorporating some of this thinking in terms of the project management from the get-go, and hopefully keeping the perspectives of the commercial aspects and and the realities on the field there, and hopefully, yeah, we'll all work together to get more capital and more projects built.
I think ESG consideration might take the secondary role in where I'm operating. But I think also the lack of ESG within the development organizations is the reason why everybody in Somalia is screaming, we don't have the funding to do more projects, we don't have the funding to do electrification. And if you don't have a good ESG system within your companies, the government supporting it, regulation there, then the impact investors will just not come in. So there should be in Somalia more TAs to reach that level of correctness in ESG. And yeah, I think that's my idea of contributing to electrification in Africa as well.
Thank you very much, everyone. And to the IFC and AfDB colleagues, we are already planning for the phase 2, so good luck, but speed up because there's more work that needs to happen. But thank you very much for the panel. And again, the final word for me is to say that I am, and I'm sure we all are, excited about this program. And it's great to see that it came from the idea brought to ARE, and ARE, thanks to also acknowledgement to Gabriela Pamesberger, who was working between the two sides, who probably helped this idea come to the right people. And so now we're having this program being launched, and so the expectations are high. The call, not just on you, but on all of us, I think, and the call is really for everyone with the support of ARE to be part of this process and make sure that you feed into it at the critical points. I think it's really great to see that this is actually a pillar of this program. It's so often we look at the likes of World Bank and big other institutions, and we say that they develop their programs and approaches in silos. So to have a very clear consultation approach is definitely very welcome. And I hope that everyone in the sector will be willing to contribute, and that we will all come out of it, better, basically, better for the sector. So thanks, everyone, for the discussion.